Hi, everybody. My name is Stephanie Patton, and I'm the Prevention Coordinator for the town of Stoughton. And welcome to our presentation on marijuana and teens. So tonight you're going to hear from three departments here in the town: the Department of Substance Abuse Prevention, the Police Department, and the Youth Commission. So we're going to be joined in a little bit by Melissa Dawson from the Stoughton Youth Commission. She's one of the social workers over there. And I'm going to let our lovely officers, Bonda and Isabel, introduce themselves as well.
Hi, I'm Officer Bonda from the Stoughton Police Department. I'm one of the school resource officers here, and I'm primarily assigned to the middle school.
And I'm Officer Isabel. I'm the other school resource officer, primarily assigned to the high school. We just wanted to talk a little bit about the purpose, why we are having these program series and what this is all about. This kind of came about with what was going on in the town over this past year. Officer Bonda and I saw a huge need for some of these issues to be addressed: mental health, consumption of marijuana products, and overall the violence, the uptick in violence. So we got together with the Youth Commission, OASIS, and the high school and middle school administrators to create this program to better inform the community, guardians of teens, and the teens themselves.
We wanted to start a little bit talking about prevention science and the three things that really contribute to adolescent substance use. So the three really big driving risk factors for young people that have to do with alcohol and other drug use, so in this case, we're really talking about marijuana, are increase in availability. So when there's more of a drug in the environment, kids are more apt to use it. So in this case, we're going to talk more about this in another episode. When drugs are legal, there's more of them in the environment. It's just the way it works. When the other thing that happens is when substances are legalized, and alcohol is another one of these examples, young people often will perceive these drugs to be less harmful because they make the assumption that things that are legal must be less harmful than other things. Why would we legalize these things as a society? And so when kids think that alcohol isn't that harmful or marijuana isn't that harmful, they are also more apt to use. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about social norms and about what kids' perceptions are about use rates, because when kids think that most of their peers are doing something, they're more likely to do that themselves. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the current trends in use. One of the things we know is that marijuana is one of the first drugs that teens are offered. And in fact, we know that nationally, about 41% of teen smokers say that they used marijuana before the age of 15. The fact that we're having a lot of these conversations in the news about legalization and marijuana in general, more so than we maybe have had in the past, really, in some ways, normalizes marijuana, and it makes it feel like it's both happening more with teenagers, but also a lot of our adolescents say that they do in fact know somebody who uses marijuana. And so it feels like it's pretty close for most kids in their regular sphere.
So as part of this, we took a look at calls for service from 2019 to 2020, and we picked a few specific categories. We looked at ages 12 to 25. And the reason for that age range is we are seeing that a lot of our Stoughton teens are hanging out with adults that are in their early 20s. So we wanted to not just include teenagers when we were looking at the calls. So on this chart here, you can see our mental health calls from 2019 to 2020 increased over 50% during that time period for ages 12 to 25. Section 12, that's an involuntary hospitalization. So if someone is having a mental health crisis, we can send them to the hospital on this section 12 so that they can be evaluated. We saw a 50% increase in those kind of calls as well. A section 35 is a court-ordered evaluation for some sort of substance abuse, whether it's alcohol or drugs. We saw an increase of 1 call in 2019 to 5 calls in 2020. Overdoses went from 4 to 11. During that same time period. And what we're seeing is that there's an increase in serious incidents involving Stoughton teens, both here in Stoughton, as well as our teens in other towns, such as Randolph and Boston.
So what's going on? So like I said, the purpose of this was to inform the community of what's going on. So we're really just putting it out there. So with the legalization of marijuana, we're having some trouble with really getting the information out there to the community about what really is legal and what is not, such as the age, the way that we store it at home. And when I say age, I mean the age of consumption, that, you know, you have to be 21 to actually have it with you or to consume it. And there's just a lot more access to these products that our teens and our people in our early 20s are now consuming. So with that, we've seen a spike in crime and more violent crime, really, that involved weapons. So we had an armed robbery where 2 guns were used. We had a murder of a 17-year-old out of Randolph, and that was over marijuana edibles. Attempted robbery resulting in a stabbing of a dealer, and a juvenile that was arrested with a gun and drugs. So this was all in this past year. This is extremely more violent than the year prior, and these are only just a handful of examples. We're seeing way more kids posting on social media about selling marijuana products that legally they're not supposed to even have in their possession. And it is very much so linked, these violent crimes, to those that are selling it, whether it's the dealer or the buyer, where they are then becoming a victim of violent crime, of a gun being involved, a knife being involved, and such.
Great, thank you. So let's look at a little bit what's been going on with the trends with our high school students and their own reporting of substance use. So one of the things we do through the OASIS Coalition and the Stoughton Public Schools is we collect anonymous data from students every other year, generally. And we ask, some of the things we ask about are substance use. And so what you see here in this chart are some of the trend data going all the way back to 2007, looking at what we consider to be current use of alcohol, marijuana, and electronic cigarettes. And so you can see that, you know, that blue line is marijuana use, and somewhere around 2016, which is when marijuana became legal for adults in the Commonwealth, our marijuana line has started to tick up a little bit. And it's actually approaching the alcohol use rates in a way that it wasn't really doing previously. It was sort of it's trending in a similar direction, but that number is getting closer. So I think that's really important. But we also want to think about it is, it's really also important to remember that most of our students are making healthy choices when it comes to non-use of substances. And so this chart really talks about what happens with actual non-use of marijuana. So that orange bar, the 80.2% is the percentage of Stoughton High School students who do not use marijuana. So it's a little bit of a different way than we're used to seeing this kind of data presented, but this is the percentage of students that do not use. The blue bar, the 84%, is the percentage of students who believe that most of their peers do use marijuana. So 84% of Stoughton High students walk around believing that most students at Stoughton High use marijuana, and the truth is that most do not. So there's a gap there between what's actually happening and what students believe. And in the prevention science, that gap is really important because it's related to use. So students who perceive that their peers are using marijuana in Stoughton are 12.7 times more likely to use marijuana themselves. So that's a pretty significant increase in risk. And so we really want to be talking to students about the truth about what's happening with marijuana use, which is that most of their peers are choosing not to use. However, for those that do, it's serious, it's significant, and we want to be talking about that as well. And so we want to also say to parents that it's not inevitable that your teenager would use marijuana. In fact, even at Stoughton High, the percentage of students who ever used in their lifetime, the average is 35% of students up until they graduate Stoughton High have reported that they've ever tried marijuana. However, that again, that number is higher than we would like. And it's really important when you talk to your kid about your own expectations, they're much less likely to use simply by the fact that you are having conversations with them. So that's really an important piece.
So some of the trends we're seeing around Stoughton related to marijuana is an increase in edible usage, including stuff they're making at home. One other thing that we're also seeing a lot of, especially at the high school, is the THC vaping cartridges, which click into any vape pen. And the issue with those is they have a very high concentrate. So the potency that's in there, because it's in such a pure form, is very, very high. So they have a lot more effect than just simply smoking a regular joint or something like that.
And so we also know a little bit about, our percentage of students that are experimenting or using some of those higher potency products. In 2019, when we surveyed Stoughton High students, what we found was that 32.9% of them had ever tried marijuana over the course of their lifetime. And of that, nearly 33%, 63% of those students had used edibles. And 55% of the students who had ever tried marijuana had used dabs, oil, shatter, and wax. And, we're going to talk a little bit more about what some of these high potency products are. But we wanted you to have a sense for, when students use marijuana, most of them at Stoughton High are experimenting with some of these high potency products. There's a small percent that report using marijuana as medicine. And we know that a lot of our students think that if they were to use marijuana, their friends wouldn't think it was a big deal. The other thing that we know nationally is that daily or near daily use of marijuana has really changed over the years. And so it used to be much less frequent that people who used marijuana were consuming marijuana every day. And that number, you can see that blue bar, has really grown. And it's one of the things when we think about health impacts of marijuana, the using daily puts somebody at much greater risk for some of the harms to marijuana than using it infrequently, which is true with a lot of substances. So let's talk about marijuana in teens. What's the big deal? We're going to talk a little bit about the health impacts here, and then we're going to talk some more about some of the products and things that you might see and what those look like. So we know that the teen brain doesn't finish developing until the age of 25, which I think is a lot longer than a lot of us maybe would like to believe. But that front part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, really doesn't finish maturing until somebody is approximately 25 years old. And it makes the teen brain much more vulnerable to drug use than an adult. And so there's a lot of scientific evidence now that really shows that marijuana use during the teen years could potentially lower a person's IQ. It can interfere with other aspects of functioning and well-being that you can sort of see on this slide. Heavy marijuana use by teens is linked to a whole host of emotional and other life outcomes that are things that we would probably like to avoid. We also know that even using marijuana occasionally can lead to risky other kinds of decisions. So teens who are under the influence of marijuana might find themselves more likely to drive under the influence, which can be particularly dangerous, engaging in unsafe sexual activity, or making other choices that could be risky for their health. We also wanted to really underline that marijuana, people sometimes think marijuana is not addictive. And the truth is that there is some addiction potential for marijuana users in general. About 1 in 10 users will experience addiction if they use marijuana regularly. You can see here in this chart the comparison of marijuana addiction to other types of addiction. And so I think typically people think about that 1 in 10 number when they're comparing the risk of addiction with other substances like tobacco or heroin, which are very addictive substances in general. But you can see that for teenagers, the risk of addiction is increased. And again, that has to do with the developing brain. And so for teens that use, their risk of addiction is something closer to 1 in 6. People who use every day have an even higher risk of addiction. People who begin using marijuana before the age of 18 are also 4 to 7 times more likely than people who start using as adults to develop problem use. And so we think about addiction as an adolescent chronic health issue, actually, because a lot of times the issues that are related to addiction start with adolescence because the adolescent brain is so much more susceptible to addiction. We also know that substance use can be reinforcing. And so when we talked about teen mental health in our first episode of this series, we talked a lot about, our concerns with kids and depression and anxiety. We know that using substances can sometimes be a way that young people and adults cope with stress, anxiety, or depression. The problem is that in the short term, sometimes it really feels like these drugs are working. So, it might feel better to be under the influence of marijuana if somebody was feeling anxious or depressed. In the short term, it really might feel like it's alleviating those symptoms. The problem is that over time, instead of, as an adolescent, instead of learning how to manage those issues and coming up with other coping strategies, the marijuana becomes the coping strategy. And so that can really lead to issues in the long run, like, this person has decreased tolerance to deal with stress or anxiety because they're high and that's how they're managing it. And so that's why sometimes we see for teens who start using marijuana as teenagers, by the time they're adults, if they stop using, they might have a harder time working through some of their emotions. They just haven't had the opportunity to practice. It's part of what adolescence is about. We know that there are links between co-occurring substance use disorders. So you can see here on the chart that's on the left, adolescents and young adults with a mental health disorder, 30 to 45% of them also have a co-occurring substance use disorder. And for teens who are struggling with substance use disorders, 65% of them or more also have a mental health disorder. So we know that if you have a teenager who's struggling with one of those things, it's really important to actually evaluate for the other. So if your kid is struggling with mental health issues, depression, anxiety, we should be really evaluating for whether they're having substance use issues. And if they're struggling with a substance use issue, we should be absolutely evaluating whether or not they have a co-occurring substance use issue. There's also been a lot of research looking at teen marijuana use and increased risk of mental health. So this is a survey that comes out of, it's local actually, it's the Metro West Health Foundation. It's their adolescent health survey where they've surveyed thousands of Massachusetts teenagers in high school in the Metro West area in Massachusetts. And so here you can see the blue bars are students who currently use marijuana. The sort of grayer bars are those that do not. And so of the students who report that life is very stressful, for example, 41% of those students were using marijuana. And so you can sort of see the relationship here between depressive symptoms, self-injury, considering suicide and attempting suicide, and current marijuana use. Those blue bars are all higher. And so there's absolutely some relationship here that's really concerning when we think about the mental health of our young people. We also know that marijuana use can be correlated with serious mental illness like schizophrenia. Marijuana directly affects the brain, particularly those parts of the brain that are responsible for learning, attention, reaction, as well as some of these other parts of the brain that regulate complex behavior. Marijuana use has been listed as a possible cause of schizophrenia. And, some studies have suggested that taking drugs like marijuana use really increases the risk of psychotic incidences and marijuana. So you can see two of those studies that are listed here. Earlier use of marijuana correlates with a higher increased risk for schizophrenia. These are really significant mental health issues. So anything we can do to prevent somebody developing one of these is a good thing. And so, noting that relationship between marijuana and schizophrenia is something that is really important. It has been shown in a lot of research studies. This is a study from Vermont linking youth who reported daily or near daily marijuana use. Remember, we said that daily use is up, and reporting planned or attempted suicide. And so you can see that there is a relationship between the amount of times that students reported that they used marijuana and the students that reported an attempted or planned suicide. So for students at the far right side of that graph, the 20 plus times, way more likely to have reported an attempted or planned suicide than students in general, in the general population. So these are all things that are concerning and why we feel like it's really important to talk about marijuana and to talk about it when it's related to teen mental health. We're going to talk a little bit here about what marijuana looks like today, what it's called, to give parents a better sense for what you might be looking for or looking at.
Okay, so this is just some forms of marijuana and what some of the names for it that we've heard recently, pot, shatter butter, blunt weed, dabs and such. And we'll go into a little bit of what these are. We're going to start off with just showing you an overall increase in what we're seeing today. So the DEA put this information out having to do with CBD oil and THC content. So as you can see, it goes from 95 to 2018. If you follow the THC line there, it's in blue, you see the potency go all the way up. And this is what we're referring to in the products that are out right now. It's way more potent compared to when somebody that say is even 40 years old now, when they were maybe a teenager. The potency is just really exploded.
So we're about to see a short clip of our fire chief, Chief Laracy, talking about edibles. This came from a video that we had produced for town meeting back in 2017. So let's hear from the fire chief.
You look at these packages I have before me. I mean, when a kid sees something like this, it's like a s'mores. It's a treat, you know, or the Rice Krispie treat as well, or the lollipop. And what's interesting, both of these labels say the same thing. I just read them. Let me just read a little part of this label here to give you an understanding. Our TKO edibles have been lab tested and contain a very high amount of THC. We strongly suggest starting with a small portion and waiting 1 to 1.5 hours before consuming more. In this packaging, it doesn't tell you what a small portion is or how much you should eat of it. So our concern, like I said, is the overdose of a child consuming this whole thing. So these are 100 milligrams of THC. And to an ordinary person, to someone like myself, you know, I don't even know what that means, because I'm not a consumer of marijuana, and that's a real concern of the fire department.
So what Chief Laracy actually showed us is very common for us to see, and it's very confusing. The packaging really doesn't tell you what size bite you're supposed to take, and the big concern is that a child or a teenager or anybody really would just consume the whole thing and have some really adverse side effects to that. These are some of the edibles that we have actually seized. They do not meet Massachusetts standards. As you can see, there were a good, I would say more than this actually, that we seized from a young adult. On to the next one.
So these are just some stock photos of items that are out there. So if you look at these packages quickly, you may not notice the marijuana leaves that are on them or the writing that says that they're medicated. And one of the things that they put in place in Massachusetts was that packaging was not meant to be geared towards kids. But something like this looks like a candy bar that you would pick up at a convenience store.
And the homemade products. So like Chief Laracy had in front of him, if you took that out of the package, it would actually look homemade. Kind of looks like it came from a bakery. The bottom right photo here is the same exact way. Different types of brownies, blondies, cookie bars and whatnot. And then the picture on the left is a Rice Krispie type Fruity Pebbles treat that actually one of our young adults was making in his house and posting on social media for people to buy. So the issue with that is any homemade item doesn't go through this lab that does quality control or anything like that. The lab is them. They're not really qualified to say exactly how much THC is in there, what the portion size is, or anything like that. So buying a homemade product like this from a young adult out of their house is just so incredibly dangerous. These are the vape cartridges that Officer Bondo had talked about earlier. This was from another seizure as well from a teenager here in Stoughton. So these are the most common that we see at Stoughton High and on our young adults in Stoughton. You can see on the right-hand side, it is just a vape cartridge. If you see it, you might actually just think it's tobacco and not marijuana, but that is all straight THC in that vial. There are also different flavors and geared more towards a younger population. This seizure was along with the Wonka bar seizure. It's the same thing off the same young adult. Quite scary that he had this much THC, this many THC products on.
So we talked a little bit earlier about the different forms that it can come in. So these are some of your most common. So you're going to have these concentrates in oil, shatter, and wax. So they're basically just different consistencies that are used for different things. And they're used for dabs, or the oils can be used to put on another item to be eaten or used directly on the tongue. So the dabs are made from extracting the THC out of the product itself, and they use butane to do that, which can make it very dangerous. We'll talk a little bit about that again in a few minutes. And then depending on the consistency, you'll hear them referred to as wax, shatter, butter, or hash oil. And then they're heated on a hot surface, and then they can be inhaled is one way that, that you can do this kind of marijuana.
So we're going to share with you a clip from the Hidden in Plain Sight video that we put together. Hidden in Plain Sight is typically something that we would do in person. And because right now of some of the restrictions, we're not able to do that. But we, if you're interested in seeing the whole thing, it's a mock teen bedroom. We're going to share with you a short clip that talks about some of the products that students, young people use to use marijuana or hide marijuana in a bedroom. So we'll play that for you. And this video is available on the OASIS website in its entirety. So I'm going to jump ahead to the part where we specifically talk about this. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the products that are in this room that might be related to smoking or vaping. So some of the things you might notice over here, there's a pencil bag, and there's a number of devices in this bag. So this is what people refer to as a mod. This is a large vaping device. You probably wouldn't see a lot of kids with these if they're trying to conceal their vaping behavior, but this is the kind of device that young people might use if they were trying to create a lot of vapor, for example, but it's not super concealable. And in this bag, there are also, mixed in among the pens, because it's easy to hide these things. There's some other types of vaping devices. You can see this one almost looks like makeup. This is another type of vaping device, different types of things that you might see. We also in here, we have these rolling papers. These are actually flavored rolling papers, which is another thing that might be attractive to younger people, flavored rolling papers to mask the way things taste. And we also have in this bag, this looks like a flashlight. It's actually a pipe. So you can take it apart and put it back together as a pipe. Over here, we have a few things that are on the nightstands that are also things that are concealable. So we have this watch, and this is actually a grinder. So I don't think it functions as a watch, but it does work to grind, for example, marijuana. There's another grinder here, which might just look like, a small little container that you would keep things in. It's actually a grinder. And I'm going to move over to the desk. So on the desk, actually, we have a couple of other things. So this is the Sorin. This is also a vaping device. It's very concealable. If I had it in my hand, you wouldn't see it. I actually sat through a meeting once holding this, palming this, and nobody saw it. It does come apart. It's refillable. This was popular for a while. They're very, they're really nice looking. They feel nice, and they're refillable. So this is something that you might see that you wouldn't necessarily recognize as a vaping product. This is the Juul. So this is what the Juul looks like. When we do this display in real life, a lot of times people walk right by it. It charges in your laptop through a USB cable. It looks like it belongs there. It looks like it's some sort of an antenna or some sort of a portable memory device, but it's actually a Juul. And there are lots of knockoffs to this product that look very similar and work in the same way. And finally over here, we have this mouse, which is actually a scale. And everything that's in this room are things that can be purchased online. So just for parents to be aware of that, it's not like you have to go to a specialty store. These things all came, and this is how we were able to fill in this display by buying stuff online. So this scale works by plugging it into anything where you can plug in a USB cable. It's electronic, and you can use it to weigh various things depending on what you're using it for. So we wanted to share with you just some of the ways that things might be easily concealed. Any of those products that are refillable can be filled with THC oil and some of the things that we were talking about earlier. So if you're interested in learning more about the hidden in plain sight display and some of the other kinds of things that might be hidden in plain sight in a teen bedroom, this video is available on the OASIS website.
So we're talking about you know, the different forms of THC and how they're consumed. And one of the big ones right now is BTO, so Butane Hash Oil. So I just went and kind of went online and looked this up, like what is the best butane to make hash oil, okay? So this is straight from the website. I did not add anything to this slide. So some of the things that they had to say about this awesome butane is it's like playing with fire, literally. People have died. You should only make it if you have the proper protection and have a fire extinguisher close, you know, closely by, and make sure that you're in a place that's ventilated. All of that is on their website as a review for this butane, and it's very scary to read that. So literally, what ends up happening is you're playing with fire. You have, you know, a heating component to this, and you're adding a gas component. So there is always a chance for something to explode. And this is how they create those oils, the THC oil that they want to consume. So this is the label that you're going to see pretty much on any type of butane bottle, which is also very, very scary. You know, it tells you that you're not supposed to be near any open flames, you know, that it is extremely flammable because it is a gas. So this is what our teens and people in their early 20s are dealing with when they are making these oils. And they are making these oils. We have had a number of people come forward and tell us about other young adults that are making these oils.
I'm muted. How would you know that your child is using marijuana? What might be some of the signs? In the short term, we know that some of the impacts and effects of marijuana include problems with memory and learning, distorted perceptions with sight, sounds, and touch, trouble with thinking, problem solving, loss of motor coordination, increased heart rate, anxiety. You might notice bloodshot pupils, or you know, that they might smell like marijuana or some other unusual smell, or maybe they suddenly are wearing a lot of cologne because they're masking some of the odor. They might look messier than usual. Sometimes people who use marijuana a lot might have poorer hygiene. You know, as a parent, I think it's really important. The way that you really could tell generally if there's a problem is really trusting your gut. I mean, some of the things that you see on this slide around shifts in mood or personality or behavior things, some of these might be things that your teen does regularly and are just sort of part of their adolescent behavior. And some of these might really be indications of change. And so if you are at all concerned that your teen might be using marijuana or some other substance, it's really important to talk to them. And Melissa is going to talk to you about how to talk to your teen about marijuana.
We're hoping that you are going to be addressing it with an openness, a willingness to hear about what's going on so that you're trying to project objectivity. We definitely want to kind of make sure that we're having these conversations too at the right time. So that helps just in itself with controlling your own emotions as a parent. So, you know, whether the answer is yes or no, and that might set you off, it's good to make sure that you are ready to hear what those answers are before even attempting these kind of conversations. So try to keep that in mind. It's also good to try to remember how you felt as a teen, and what that was like for you when your parents or adults were trying to have conversations with you about serious matters. So even just kind of tuning into what that was like and what maybe worked for you or you felt was effective for you as a teen, and messaging that you heard that stuck with you, and try to kind of model that for your own kids. So of course, as I mentioned, try to be calm, try to be relaxed. I know that sometimes some of the answers that we may get from our kids around their marijuana use or what they know about it can spike some anxiety, but you know, approaching the conversation with anger or panic is going to make it harder to have an open, honest conversation with your teen. So try to stay positive. So approaching the situation with any kind of shame, making your teen feel bad, or making them feel like they're in trouble, you're angry, or using scare tactics, it's going to just be counterproductive. So try to aim for just being curious, respectful, understanding, and open to being understanding. So try very hard not to lecture. I know, you know, it's easier said than done. You want to give as much information as you can to try to prevent use, but it will mostly likely lead to shutting down, tuning you out, or the teen becoming angry or worse. So try to find a comfortable setting to have this conversation. So, you know, a more spontaneous, casual approach will lower everyone's anxiety. So maybe try it in a car if you're picking your kid up from school, on a walk, something that is not so pressure filled, or, you know, we need to have a serious conversation and sit down. More than likely when you do things like that, the child is already scared and they're already tuned out, and they're, you know, more focused on answering your questions to get out of trouble than being honest. So a casual approach is always better. And then of course, use open body language, you know, try not to finger point, be aware of, you know, the messages you're sending with your own body. If your arms are crossed, if you're giving closed gestures, that doesn't really show that you are open to learning and hearing and helping. So.
Great. Thank you, Melissa.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And we wanted to make sure we, you know, continue to share resources with folks. So we talked about some of these actually both in the beginning and then referenced some of these resources throughout. So we know Melissa talked a lot up front about the Stoughton Youth Commission as a great resource for Stoughton residents, Stoughton youth and families who are looking for support and services. The Youth Commission's also on the web, and you can absolutely call the office. The OASIS Coalition maintains a website and also a Facebook page. And so all of these resources are available there as well. There are a whole host of substance abuse related resources, treatment resources for teens and adults, sort of the gamut of the types of things that one might need, both for support for a family, as well as for the individual. And, you know, one of the best ways to get connected with treatment resources is also to use the Massachusetts helpline, which is that 1-800-327-5050 number. There will be a live person who can help you distinguish what might be most useful. And then we, as always, we like to include some of these distress helplines, the suicide prevention lifeline, some of these, the hotline and crisis numbers. And of course, if you know, if you find yourself in really an immediate crisis, you can always call 911, and our police and fire departments will, of course, respond and help you to get the help that you need.